Dan Mullins, head coach, Florida, uh, been under heat, hasn't been great, didn't look great against Georgia. Last year they're playing Alabama in the SEC championship. They play them right down to the wire. They had Kyle Trask. They looked pretty good. They got Pitts. They were a very solid team. And this year they take a step back. And here's the issue with a school like Florida, the expectations there. Dan Mullins comes from Mississippi State. Mississippi State, if you go 10-2, the next year you go 8-4, not a big deal. That's not going to fly at Florida. That's not how it works. It's a blue blood program. The expectation is each and every year you're trying to go undefeated. You're trying to make sure you can beat Georgia. You better beat Tennessee at this point every year with how they've been playing. And then you better be able to compete with Bama or LSU from the West. Like, that is the expectation. And so if you're not making the SEC championship, you should be knocking on the door at 10-2, 11-1. And ultimately, and if you think about this and being someone who's my age, who, born in the early 80s, watching Florida under Steve Spurrier, watching, Bobby Bowden, you saw what Miami was doing during that time with, a number of coaches, through the 80s. And then ultimately, Butch Davis in the 90s into Larry Coker. Florida was it, man. They were at the top of the college football heap, and they were competing every year. They were really good. If they had a playoff system like now, I mean, they probably would have been in the playoffs 2 out of every 3 years. And they were rolling through tons of NFL talent. They still have a lot of that talent. They're still ruling the state of Florida, but they're just not the same team that they've been. And I think, a lot of that is probably some of the talent. Dan Mullen probably not recruiting quite as much. Rumored that he kind of wants to look around the NFL because recruiting's hard and it's a year-round game. But it's easier to be an average coach with great players than a great coach with average players. I know Dan Mullins understands that, but a lot of college coaches get burnout on recruiting. They think the grass is greener in the NFL and they want to try to get there. Maybe that's been Dan Mullins' play. Maybe that's been his plan. But he fires his O-line coach. He fires his defensive coordinator, Todd Grantham. And, frankly, I played for Todd. He was in Dallas. He was our D-line coach. I met with him when he was the D coordinator for the Browns, when he was coming back, when I was coming out for the NFL draft. He's been at Georgia, had a run there. He's a really, really smart football coach. He might be too smart for his own good. And I think he probably knows that he's usually the smartest guy in the room. And, that was always my, problem with Todd, not problem, but I just watched, Grantham coach in college. And I wondered, are these schemes too complex? Does he do things sometimes that maybe it's great on paper and it works with, at the pro level, and it can work with some college teams, but do you really need to do that? Are you taking the best advantage of the talent that you have? At Georgia, he had a ton of talent. At Florida, he's had some talent. But here's the reality. Is it too complicated? Are you trying to outsmart yourself? And Todd he said he's a really smart and he's a really good football coach. But the numbers have to bear out, and you have to be able to utilize that talent and be able to get ultimately the most out of it. And that wasn't happening at Florida. This year they weren't near as good as the expectations were. And I always say you don't get fired for failing to win. You get fired for not meeting the expectations or failing to meet those expectations. And so at a program like Florida with lofty expectations each and every year, total defense, they're sitting there at 43rd. And I'm not a huge total defense guy. To me, it's not the be all end all metric. I'm more of a scoring defense, but still, 56th in scoring defense, about 24 points a game, and then yards per play. Because there's going to be games where you play a lot of defensive snaps just because maybe your offense isn't on the field. Maybe it's more of a, high scoring game, but how are you on a per end, play in and play out basis? And 5.44 yards for the Florida Gators, near the bottom in college football, not nearly enough, or too much rather, not nearly good enough. So Dan Mullen's going to have to revamp that staff a little bit. We'll see if he's able to make the correct changes. We'll see if he's there after next year. When you fire coaches during the season, it's implied that you're coming back, but that it's only given you 1 year. And so we'll see what happens and where they go moving forward.